I want to start by asking you a question. It is a simple question, but the answer might change your life. Imagine I am holding a glass of water in my hand. How heavy is this glass? 5 ounces? 8 ounces? It doesn't seem like much. You could hold it easily. But what if I asked you to hold it for an hour? Your arm would start to ache. What if I asked you to hold it for a day? Your arm would go numb. Your muscles would cramp. Eventually, the pain would become unbearable and you would be paralyzed. The weight of the glass hasn't changed. It is the same glass. But the longer you hold on to it, the heavier it becomes. Our lives are exactly like this glass. The stress, the worries, the betrayals, and the anger we feel, these are the water. Think about them for a minute and they are manageable. Think about them for an hour and they begin to hurt. But if you carry them with you all day, every day for years, they will paralyze you. You will become incapable of doing anything else. Today, I want to tell you a story about a man who didn't know how to put the glass down. A man who learned that the heaviest burdens we carry are not on our shoulders, but in our minds. This is the story of the architect and the sack of potatoes. Meet Thomas. By every definition of the modern world, Thomas was a success. He was a brilliant architect living in the heart of Chicago. He designed skyscrapers that pierced the clouds. He dealt in steel, glass, and concrete. He was a man of structure. He demanded perfection from himself and everyone around him. But if you could look inside Thomas's heart, you wouldn't see a skyscraper. You would see a ruin. Thomas had a dangerous memory. He never forgot a detail. But more importantly, he never forgot a hurt. He remembered the exact date his business partner, Mark, had taken credit for his idea 5 years ago. He remembered the cold tone of his father's voice when he was a child. He remembered the friend who borrowed money and never called back. Thomas kept these memories sharp. He polished them every day like trophies in a museum of pain. He told himself that keeping this anger made him strong. He thought that if he forgave them, he would be weak. So he carried his anger like a shield. But the shield was crushing him. Thomas was chronically exhausted. He had high blood pressure. He snapped at his wife. He had no patience with his children. He drove his luxury car in silence, his mind constantly replaying arguments from 10 years ago. He was winning at his career, but he was losing at life. One rainy Tuesday in November, Thomas reached his breaking point. He had just lost a major contract because he was too distracted by an old grudge to focus on the new design. He realized something had to change. He remembered an old professor from his university days. A man named Professor Eldridge who taught psychology not from books but from life. Thomas drove to the professor's house, desperate for an answer. He sat in the professor's study, surrounded by the smell of old paper and rain. Thomas looked defeated. "Professor," Thomas said, his voice shaking, "I have built buildings that can withstand earthquakes, but I cannot withstand my own mind. I'm angry all the time. I feel heavy. I feel like I am dragging 1,000 pounds of chains behind me. Why can't I be happy?" The professor took off his glasses and looked at Thomas with deep compassion. "Thomas," he said softly, "you are tired because you are a collector. You collect injustices. You think you are punishing the people who hurt you by remembering their crimes. But you are wrong. You are drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." Thomas frowned. "So what do I do? Just let them get away with it? Forget justice?" The professor smiled. "No. I want to try an experiment with you. A physical experiment. It will require 1 week of your life. Do you trust me?" Thomas nodded. "I will do anything." The professor went to his kitchen and returned with a large, rough burlap sack and a basket of raw, unwashed potatoes. "Here is your task," the professor said. For the next 7 days, I want you to think of every person who has ever hurt you. Every person you hold a grudge against. For each person, take a potato. Carve their name onto it with a knife. And put it in this sack. Thomas thought this sounded easy. Maybe even satisfying. But, the professor raised a finger, there is a condition. You must keep this sack with you at all times. Everywhere. If you go to work, the sack goes with you. If you get in your car, the sack sits in the passenger seat. If you go to a restaurant, the sack goes under the table. And when you sleep, the sack must be right next to your pillow. You cannot leave it for even 1 minute. Do you accept? Thomas accepted. He went home that night, feeling a strange sense of purpose. He took a sharp knife and sat at his kitchen table. He picked a large, lumpy potato. "This is for Mark," he whispered, carving the name deep into the skin. He threw it in the bag. Thud. He picked another. "This is for Sarah, who lied to me." Thud. "This is for my father." Thud. "This is for that client who didn't pay." Thud. By the time he was finished, the sack was heavy. It contained about 20 potatoes. Thomas tied the top and placed it next to his bed. He felt righteous. He thought, "Finally, I have captured my enemies. I am in control." Day 1 was manageable. Thomas walked into his high-end architecture firm carrying a dirty burlap sack. His employees looked at him with confusion. "What is that, sir?" his assistant asked. "Just a project," Thomas replied, heaving the sack onto his pristine glass desk. Looked ugly. It took up space. Every time he tried to review a blueprint, the sack was there in his peripheral vision. It was a distraction. But Thomas felt proud of his burden. Day 2 came. The novelty began to wear off. The sack was heavy, about 15 pounds. Carrying it from the car to the elevator, then to the office, then back to the car. It was a physical strain. Thomas's shoulder began to ache. He found he couldn't walk fast. He had to move slowly to balance the weight. He realized that his anger was physically slowing him down. He couldn't run toward his future because his hands were too full of his past. Then came day 3. And this is when the true lesson began. Potatoes are organic matter. When they are cut and kept in a closed, dark, warm space, they begin to change. They begin to decompose. On the morning of the 3rd day, Thomas woke up to a faint, unpleasant smell. He sniffed the air. It was sour, earthy, like wet soil and decay. He looked at the sack on his bedside table. A small wet patch was forming at the bottom. The rot had begun. He tried to ignore it. He dragged the sack to work. But the smell followed him. In the elevator, a woman wrinkled her nose and moved to the corner, away from him. Thomas felt a flush of embarrassment. He wanted to say, "It's not me. It's the bag." But he couldn't. The bag was him. He was the one holding it. He realized that holding on to this negativity was making him repulsive to others. His anger wasn't attracting justice. It was repelling people. Day 4 and day 5 were a nightmare. The potatoes were now actively rotting. They were turning into a slimy, moldy mush. The gases released by the decay were nauseating. Thomas sat in his expensive leather car, the windows down, gagging at the smell from the passenger seat. He looked at the bag. The names he had carved, Mark, Sarah, Dad, were no longer visible. They were just covered in green and white mold. The individual identities of the people didn't matter anymore. It was just one big, stinking mess of negativity. He couldn't focus on his work. The smell gave him a headache. He couldn't enjoy his food because the stench ruined his appetite. He couldn't hug his wife because he had to hold the bag with one hand. The justice he thought he was carrying had turned into a poison that was infecting every single part of his life. On the night of the 6th day, Thomas lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. The smell filled the room. It was suffocating. Tears stung his eyes. In the silence of the night, a realization hit him like a lightning bolt. The people whose names were on those potatoes, where were they? Mark was probably sleeping soundly in his own house. Sarah was probably watching a movie, laughing with her friends. They were not smelling the rot. They were not carrying the weight. They didn't have a sore shoulder. They were free. Only Thomas was suffering. He was the jailer, but he was also the prisoner. He was poisoning his own sleep, his own work, and his own marriage, to punish people who had already moved on. He realized that his anger was not punishing them. It was only destroying him. The next morning, Thomas didn't even wait for the full 7 days. He grabbed the leaking, stinking sack and ran out the door. He drove to the professor's house, seeing nothing but the road ahead. He burst through the professor's door, breathless, sweating, and looking ill. "I can't do it," Thomas shouted, his voice cracking. "I can't carry this anymore. Stinks. It's heavy. It is ruining my life." The professor sat calmly in his armchair, reading a book by the fire. He looked up at Thomas, who was standing there shaking with the filthy bag. "Why?" asked the professor calmly. "Why is it ruining your life?" "Because I have to carry it," Thomas yelled. "I hate it." The professor stood up slowly. He walked over to Thomas and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Thomas," he whispered. "So, why don't you just put it down?" Thomas froze. He looked at the professor. Then he looked at his own hand. His knuckles were white. His fingers were cramped from gripping the handle so tight. He had held on to it for so long, he had forgotten that he had a choice. He had forgotten that no one had glued the bag to his hand. He was the one holding on. Slowly, painfully, Thomas opened his fingers. The heavy sack hit the wooden floor with a wet, heavy thud. Thomas stood up straight. He rolled his shoulders. He took a deep, massive breath. For the first time in a week, the air didn't smell like rot. It smelled like freedom. The professor looked at the bag on the floor, then back at Thomas. "My son," he said, his voice grave, "the potatoes are your hatred. The potatoes are your grudges. When you first hold on to a grudge, it feels solid. It feels justified. But over time, like those potatoes, anger corrupts. It rots. It releases poison into your system. It changes you from the inside out. Makes you heavy. It pushes good people away from you. And the tragedy is, you carry this rotting weight everywhere you go, while the people who hurt you walk free." Forgiveness, the professor continued, is not saying that what they did was right. It is not saying you accept their behavior. Forgiveness is simply the decision that you will no longer carry a bag of rotting potatoes in your heart. It is the decision that you value your own peace more than you value your past pain. Thomas walked out of that house a different man. He left the bag there. He left the rot there. He walked into the morning sunlight, and for the first time in years, he noticed that the sky was blue. He noticed the birds singing. He realized that his hands were empty, and because they were empty, they were now free to build something new. My friends, I want to speak to you now. I want you to look at your own life. Look at your own hands. What are you gripping? How long have you been carrying that sack? Is it the insult from last year? Is it the betrayal from a partner? Is it the unfairness of a parent? Check the contents of your heart. Has it started to rot? Is it poisoning your joy? Is it keeping people away from you? Are you tired? We often pray for peace, we work for peace, but we refuse to let go of the war inside us. You cannot travel far if you are carrying a heavy load. You cannot fly if you are tied to the ground by chains of your own making. The past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. You were not made to carry this load. You were made for light. You were made for the present moment. So today, do yourself a favor. Take a deep breath. Visualize that heavy, rotting bag of anger you have been dragging for miles. Realize that it is serving no purpose other than to slow you down. Realize that the person who hurt you is not feeling the weight. Only you are. Make the choice. Open your hand. Let it fall. Walk away. You are free.